Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. It seems like despite numerous setbacks, this administration refuses to give up on trying to get the Save America Act passed. The president even went as far as to threaten to not reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act if his SAVE Act was not passed in full. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is what allows U.S. intelligence agencies to spy on the communications of foreign nationals. And the president seems to think that threatening to veto its reauthorization is some sort of power move because he thinks that the Democrats love that act because they are able to use it against him. I don't know which part of that statement is more ridiculous. The idea that Democrats are in favor of foreign surveillance and would not relish the opportunity to limit the powers of the U.S. intelligence agencies to do that, or that they're trying to use foreign intelligence spying against the president, further reinforcing this delusion that Democrats are out to get him and using spying to do it. I'm not convinced for one moment that Democrats are so desperate to retain the ability to spy on foreign nationals that they would bend over backwards to get the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to be reauthorized at the cost of giving the president the SAVE Act he is so desperate to get passed. And it's so obvious why he is so desperate to have the SAVE Act passed. Because the SAVE Act is very clearly voter suppression in its most clear and obvious form. The Save America Act should be called the Save Republicans Act, because that's really all it's meant to do. They know that without passing the Save America Act, they are going to get absolutely destroyed in the upcoming midterm elections, because the political tides are turning against the administration and its party, and they don't want to lose their tenuous grip on power. It's galling how they still try to push this narrative that the Save America Act is just about election integrity and making sure our elections are safe and people who shouldn't be voting aren't voting. When the reality is the Save America Act is really about keeping the people that they don't want voting from voting. People like minorities aren't anyone who would vote against them and vote Democrat. But they still seem to think that if they wrap it in a coating of virtue and integrity and protection, it'll be more palatable and easier to swallow by people who don't realize what the act's true aim really is. The Republican Party really has an uphill battle trying to get this Save America Act passed, as they should. It is an awful piece of legislation that should not be passed and almost definitely will never be passed. Despite this fact, Republicans are trying everything they can to get it through, even hiding it in a $350 billion military spending package they're trying to get passed through the budget reconciliation process. If the thing they were trying to get passed wasn't so blatantly awful, you'd almost have to admire their tenacity and inability to give up on something that very clearly is not going to work. If you have to seek out so many alternate channels and sneaky ways to get it through, maybe it's something that should not go through at all. I was thinking, can you imagine if Democrats tried to pull something like this? But the reality is, I don't think they would ever do something like this. If they had a piece of legislation that they really wanted to get passed, but it really didn't seem like it had any chance of getting through, they wouldn't have their president threaten to veto one legislation so that they could have the legislation they wanted passed, or try to include it in a military spending bill so that it got passed while circumventing the channels that would have prevented it. The modern Republican Party has shown that to them the only thing that matters is winning, and what it takes to do that does not matter. Whether it is right or wrong, legal or illegal, winning is everything. And preventing the other team from winning is also everything. For Republicans, when it comes to winning an election, nothing is off the table. No matter how underhanded or tricky it may be, all that matters is they secure a win by any means necessary. If they can't convince a majority of people to vote for them, they'll at least make sure a lot of people aren't able to vote at all. So that if they can't have their vote, no one can. So they can win elections not because a majority of voters wanted them to win, but because a large amount of voters were prevented from voting at all, and the few that were still allowed to vote voted for them. The Save America Act, at least on paper, is fighting a problem that does not exist. They keep pushing this notion that the Save America Act must be passed because they have to save the country from voter fraud, people voting illegally. But time and time again, they've done the research and found that there really is no voter fraud going on in our elections. There is not rampant illegal voting. And the very minuscule amount of verifiable voter fraud cases have been of Republicans being found to be the ones fraudulently voting. And I think the administration and the Republican Party as a whole knows that. They know the Save America Act is itself built upon a false premise, that the thing they're promising to save America from isn't something America needs saving from, because it's not really a thing at all. And the true purpose of the SAVE Act has absolutely nothing to do with saving America and everything to do with saving themselves. One of the things I find the most aggravating is the fact that I know that when these plans fail, when they aren't able to attach it to the military spending bill, when his threat to veto that Foreign Spying Act doesn't immediately get him what he wants, they aren't going to stop there. They're going to keep trying and keep pushing this thing until November, probably. And given just how badly they're looking like they're going to lose in November, I suppose from that perspective it makes sense to not give up until the very end. The Republican Party knows that once the midterm elections don't go their way, they do not have a path forward and have their agenda take hold. Without voter suppression keeping Democrats from winning big in the midterms, they know that they have at most 2 years of very weak power to look forward to, and almost definitely at least another 4 years of basically no power once Democrats retake the presidency in 2028. So at the very least, their desperation to get this SAVE Act is understandable, even if it is ultimately futile. If the Republican Party as a whole had any ability to have any sort of self-reflection, they might realize that if they have to stoop to this level, to these desperate measures to get their agendas through, maybe they aren't the good guys they think themselves to be. They aren't saving America, quite the opposite, actually. It's become abundantly clear in the last decade that what America needs is to be saved from them, not by them. Republican leaders and policies have decimated this country, and the last thing we need is voter suppression to ensure that those remain to be the law of the land indefinitely. Republican governance has shown itself to be bad for this country, and the last thing we need as a country is the SAFE Act coming along and ensuring that that is the governance that we all have going forward. If we truly needed legislation to save America, it would be to save America from Republicans. Though I'm not really sure what form such a legislation would take. Legislation to outlaw the modern Republican Party entirely does sound nice, though for obvious reasons that is not even a realistic option. But honestly, at this point, I'm getting tired of hearing about the Save America Act that we really do have. It's bad legislation, and we should not be okay with voter suppression in this country, regardless of who it's targeting. I know it's largely just so that Republicans can keep their power and prevent Democrats from getting it back. But it still boggles my mind how the average American could support it at all. I know many have bought into the propaganda that America is at risk, that non-citizens are constantly voting and undermining the integrity of the voting process in this country. But with so much clear, verifiable evidence to the contrary, they're living in a denial state where the facts do not line up with their beliefs, and they simply are willing to ignore it because they choose to cling to what they want to believe, ignoring what the truth is. Far too many are willing to believe the lies pushed by the Republican Party about voter integrity and the proliferation of voter fraud. And it's because so many are so readily willing to believe these claims that the administration can get away with constantly trying to push, or at least attempt to push, passage of this legislation that the majority of American people do not want and certainly do not believe in. But as long as they can keep their group of very easily led, very easily manipulated people, the Republican Party feels empowered to constantly push this legislation, seemingly believing that if they just keep pushing it in different ways, eventually one of them has to work. And I have to admit, I'm at least a bit concerned that if they continuously push this thing, eventually they may succeed. They are relentless because they know what's at stake for them when they lose. And without the massive amount of voter suppression the Save America Act would afford them, they will. Because at this point, even many of their former supporters have turned against them because they've seen that this administration does not know how to lead and has only made everything worse for the average American. So they're now stuck in a position where cheating to win seems to be their only path forward. And while I may not be quite as confident as I would like to be, I do stand firm in the belief that they need to stop trying to make the Save America Act happening, because it's just not gonna happen. And as such, I hope they just give up, though I can't truly see them doing so. But I suppose now all we can do is wait and see. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice. Until next time, when I cut you off, another slice of news. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.